possible these messages that the film carries. We've been really careful to try to tick the box of standards so that teachers can more easily use the film in the classrooms. So who knows what that was. Anyway, I think I can probably wrap it up here. I will say one thing, because we had no money, we did an Indiegogo, we did a crowdfunding campaign, and these, I warn you, are very, very time consuming. I mean, they'll take 6 months out of your life because you have to do a lot of strategic planning in advance. You've got to shoot a video about, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. But not only do you get money, and by the way, we didn't get this much money because you have to pay, I mean, be sure to factor in that you're going to have to pay processing fees, and you pay a fee to Indiegogo, and then you also have to fulfill all of the rewards that you've promised your supporters. So, but what's great is it's not just a financial thing. You build your base of supporters, and then you have this wonderful flock of angels that love what you're doing, and they're behind you all the way, and they want to see you succeed. And a lot of these people are the people who will spread the word about the film and help encourage friends to organize screenings. So I think it's well worth it, but just know what you're getting into. And I apologize, I had put together a different slideshow, but it didn't upload correctly. So, but that's basically what I wanted to say. I might go back to trying to get a nature film on the air, but it's difficult. I mean, my films always speak out for non-humans and try to you know, pull the veil, and so that people are more aware of the issues that they face. But when it's a broadcast television, if it's broadcast, an NCTV broadcaster, 2 minutes, that's going to provide funding for it, they need it to fit into their parameters. And so, for instance, in The Last Pig, we go into a slaughterhouse. It's not graphic, but it's an important part of the story. And for nature, that just wouldn't, they can't do that. And so, you know, you're going to have to do that dance. On one hand, they'll get it out there. On the other hand, it may not be exactly the film that you wanted to make. So that's pretty much it. And because my flight was delayed by an hour and a half, I get to stay for Q&A afterwards and listen to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. I'm happy to introduce our second speaker, who is the Executive Director of NYCLASS, a New York City-based animal rights and political action nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the abuse of New York City's carriage horses, enacting animal rights legislation into law, and electing pro-animal candidates to office. Edita has helped pass numerous pieces of animal rights legislation into law and has been an animal rights activist for nearly 2 decades, leading many campaigns around the country. Let's welcome Edita Birnkrant.
Wow, what a welcome. Thank you. So obviously this talk is about, the name of it is Animals in the Mainstream, which was kind of, to me even, what does that exactly mean? So mine kind of goes over different forms of mainstream, because that means a lot of different things. This is a picture of me, obviously, and some other supporters. This was during a City Hall hearing that just happened last month, actually, where over a dozen animal rights bills were being heard, which is like a historic day for animal rights. I know there's some New Yorkers here. So we work on a lot of different issues in my organization, but the primary focus is to help the carriage horses, but there's also so many other important issues going on. And our motto is, we love animals and we vote. Because if we want to change the world for animals, one really important way to do that is by changing and creating laws that change the world for animals in a permanent, significant way. And that is happening across the world and in New York City also. And Jane Velez Mitchell is not here, but I love this quote of hers: "You can't use tradition to justify cruelty," and that's a carriage horse that dropped dead on the street, because tradition is often the main justification used to continue exploiting animals, and that's kind of the mainstream thinking that people have that we need to get past as activists and break through. So this is an image that looks like maybe it's photoshopped and that it's not real, but elephants were regularly paraded through Times Square in New York City and even through the Midtown Tunnel, which is a main way into Manhattan. This went on for years. It was a big media thing. People thought it was so cool. People would line up and like it was a parade watching the elephants go through. So how did we go from that horrifying reality to that being normal to a complete ban on wild animal acts in 2017 in New York City? In case some of you don't know, New York City passed and enacted a law to ban all wild animal performances in 2017. And this was a real victory for activism because the bill was in the city council for 11 years before it passed. And in that time, activists never stopped holding protests of Ringling Brothers and other circuses that use wild animals and calling for a ban. And it just shows that we can never give up. Progress is happening for animals all over the world. And just to give a little insight into the Ringling situation and the wild animal circus ban in New York City, because I think there's so much to learn from it. So in 2016, maybe some of you remember, Ringling Brothers announced they would stop using elephants in their shows. After many decades of protests, undercover footage showing horrific abuse and cruelty, and bullhook bans that had passed in certain cities. So public sentiment had really shifted and Ringling Brothers could no longer deny it. So then this took many of us by surprise. I didn't see this coming. I remember getting an alert on my phone and I thought it was fake. An AP News, Ringling has shut down. The largest circus in the world shut down the very next year in 2017. And I think the main reason is because they had refused to adapt to a changing public consciousness about using wild animals, and they ultimately paid the price with their entire industry gone, their circus gone. But again, what led up to that? It didn't just happen by accident. Activists held continual protests in New York City and around the country, educating the public and elected officials about the cruelty of using wild animals in circuses, often getting media attention. The photo in front of City Hall that was at the City Hall hearing for Intro 1233, that was what the bill number was, to ban the use of wild animal acts, and the bill eventually passed in 2017. Now it's the law of the land in New York City, and other cities such as LA and San Francisco have already passed this ban. But we need more cities to get on board with this, and hopefully all of you who live in cities where circuses come can help with that. So, okay, how do we make that happen though? This is a picture from a few years ago in Albany, which is our capital in New York. This was a Humane Society of the United States organized lobby day. So wherever you live, you have an elected official that wants your vote and support. So you can use that power to help advance animal rights. And I know it can be intimidating. It seems like, oh, I can't just call up my elected official, but yes, you can. And once you do it once, it's not that intimidating. You can just pick up the phone, arrange an in-person meeting with your local elected official, let them know that you care about animals and you vote. And if you can bring other family or friends with you that live in that area, that's even better. You want to show them that you aren't just you represent a community of people, whatever you're involved with or whatever. Make them know that you represent other people. And remember that they work for you. Bring your concerns about whatever animal issues you have to them. You can even suggest that they introduce legislation to advance animal rights. It helps if you focus on just one or two issues because you have limited time in these meetings with your elected officials, so you don't want to bring 10 things to them. But it's as simple as that. You can walk in and how does anyone think legislation gets introduced? It's just an idea, and you bring it to someone and they can create it. And if there's any lobby days happening in your area organized by animal groups, or create one on your own. So there's many different ways that you can get active political. And remember to always go back to the power that you have. It may not seem like you have a lot of power as one person, but to your elected officials, that is powerful. You're one person, you're one vote, you represent others. So don't forget that. And in terms of getting media attention, that can also maybe seem intimidating to people, but you'd be surprised that how accessible and friendly many local reporters are, and even in New York City. So just by simply emailing, tweeting, or calling a reporter, you can begin, that can be the beginning of an actual working relationship or friendly relationship with that reporter in your area. And oftentimes there's reporters that are assigned to cover animal issues. So if you reach out directly to them, then they know who you are, you know who they are, then you have a relationship. And if you're at a protest where media is covering, always introduce yourself, get the reporter's card. I've done that so many times, and then just text them, email them. And it's surprising that just simply thanking that reporter, say they do a story about a local protest or animal issue you're covering, following up and just thanking them and saying they did a good job, that goes a long way. You'd be surprised at how much they appreciate that, because a lot of times they get negative feedback. So that's just an easy thing to do to help, create a relationship. And many of you probably already know this, but politicians and reporters love Twitter. They're all on it, and you can use that to your advantage as an advocacy tool. Tag them in your tweets and respond directly to them. This is just a couple of recent examples I used. This is a good way to get attention on animal rights issues. Ask other friends to retweet. You'd be surprised, because I'm telling you, all politicians, not just Trump, all politicians use Twitter, and reporters love it. So this is, of all the social media, Twitter's the most effective for, reaching them. So I'm just going to talk about it. One specific issue. This sad image is what was always the reality for over 100 years. Carriage horses in New York City lined up in traffic right on busy 59th Street as cars whizzed by and blaring horns. Another example of how activism works. We made history in New York City, finally getting progress this past March when the carriage horses were moved out of traffic, where that's the empty street where they once had to stand, and they were moved into locations inside Central Park, which was a significant, positive, meaningful change for these horses that have had none for decades. And even in spite of the carriage drivers suing the city and my organization, they lost, because from constant mainstream attention on this issue and activists not giving up, it was finally time to make some progress for these horses. And now that image of them stuck on 59th Street 10 hours a day in traffic is no longer the case anymore. And but that's just one small, tiny step of progress. We're currently right now working on other legislation, because these carriage horses work in the worst heat waves in New York City, which is appalling for a progressive city. We're trying to pass, it's called the Carriage Horse Heat Relief Bill, Intro 1425. We already have 20 sponsors in the council on board, which is a good number, but we need more. Any of you here who live in New York or know friends or family in New York, you all have a council member. Please call your council member next week, ask them to support this bill. We want to get a hearing. Well, we already had a hearing on this bill, actually. It was very successful. We want to get a vote on this bill and pass it by the fall at the latest. So any calls you can make would really help. And again, this only is the result of kind of activism leading to this fruition of finally seeing some progress. And I like to think of it as effectively organizing. It's like community organizing. That's a big part of effective animal rights advocacy, because you don't just magically have a group of people that are dedicated to helping on your issue unless you create one. So you can reach out to others in your community to create and grow a core group of engaged people you can count on to help advance your animal rights issues. And this isn't complicated or fancy. You don't need a lot of money to do this. It could be as simple as creating a Facebook page, inviting people. On the street activism is an easy way to meet people and reach others in your area who want to join your efforts. Just go to where the people are, wherever that is, subways, busy areas. On the street activism is so important. You can attend community events and local political events to meet engaged community members, attend your local community board meetings. You can also host open events open to the public. That's another way to kind of make connections. And if you're working on passing animal rights legislation, joining your local Democratic club is a very good idea. So those are just some easy tips. And just to talk, because I mentioned horse carriages, and to show how mainstream this issue is getting more attention. This is just a list of kind of the more recent cities that have either banned or are working on very restricted the operation of their carriage horse industry. So this is kind of a worldwide trend of this being an issue that is more in the mainstream, and I have a Google News alert set to carriage horses, and there's tons of stuff all the time happening on that issue because people are more aware of it, only because activists made it an issue. And speaking of mainstream, I know we already maybe mentioned social media, but it's not always easy or sometimes impossible to get mainstream attention, but now we're in the era where you can become the media with social media. And probably all of you know who Jane Velez-Mitchell is. If you don't follow her page, she has an online social media news network. So her story is that she was a successful journalist with her own CNN headline news show for years, and she cared about animal rights, so every so often she would cover animal rights issues. But after she left her show, she decided not to go. She could have definitely had another show on a mainstream news network, but she felt like she actually reaches more people with her animal rights message through social media than she ever did even on CNN headline news. So maybe we don't all have the following that Jane Velez-Mitchell has, but we can all become the media and help and grow our message. As long as you have a cell phone and a Facebook page, you can go live on Facebook and report, sort of become, a report on whatever pressing animal issues are happening. Videos go viral all the time and gain worldwide attention. You can follow the Jane Velez-Mitchell Facebook page to get ideas, because there's constantly doing live stories. We don't have a ton of time left, but just to give you an example because I think it's so important in getting mainstream attention that we document and take videos. And everything you see here was done with a cell phone. This was a carriage horse. There's no audio, but this was a horse I filmed during a heat wave in serious respiratory heat distress. And this was something that was driving me crazy because this was happening and nobody was doing anything about it. So I filmed this, I put it out on social media, and it spread like wildfire. People were so outraged, and because of that one video, that actually is a big part of why our legislation got introduced, because it just showed the reality of the horror that these animals go through. And all you need to do this, to expose whatever animal issues are going on, is a cell phone. I'm not sure, is the top showing or is it cut off? It's cut off a little, yeah. So this was just another example of something I did with the cell phone to show how hot the ground gets in New York City, where it can be 45 degrees hotter than the air temperature, and that's affecting the horse. This was a strategy to kind of get the attention of legislators, and this is something anyone could easily do. The audio is very low, but it was a heat wave day, the horses were working, so I said, I'm gonna, this was bought off of Amazon for $20, this thermometer, and measured the street to show the reality, and it was 115 degrees, the ground on that day, and posted this on social media. You can send to your local elected officials. These are things that all of us can do. You all have cell phones. It is not complicated, and that can be the difference between getting mainstream attention for your issue, because visuals are so important. This is just another visual of how exposing the reality, like of metal bits in horses' mouths, how if you don't make something an issue and expose the truth, no one's going to know about it. And again, just a cell phone picture showing the reality of horses working in Times Square, showing, the horrible crashes and deaths that happen, showing the reality of how the carriage horses live. And you can bring all these to the attention of your elected officials for whatever issue you're working on. And as I mentioned, in June, we had a really historic day, not just for our city, but for all of animal rights, that New York City had a hearing in the New York City Department of Health for over a dozen animal rights bills, including ban on the sale of fur, ban on the sale of foie gras, and it was actually 16 animal rights bills. And this, again, was the result of years of street activism, media attention, relationships with elected officials. It doesn't just happen overnight, but the steps to get there are not really that complicated once you know. And this was the rally for, you see the coat that says fur kills. This was the rally on the City Hall steps before the bill to ban the sale of fur. Many similar bans have already passed, Los Angeles, San Francisco, West Hollywood, but it clearly would be a huge moment for animal rights as a movement if New York City were to pass this bill. And this bill is still pending, and if it passes in New York, it'll be easier to pass in other cities. We definitely have our work cut out for us to pass this, but it's happening. And this, again, was after decades of progress. And of course, celebrity support, you probably all know that's Tim Gunn. That always helps. We don't always have access to celebrities, but if you do, if you can get them on board, that's always a help, because whether we like it or not, the media loves celebrities and they get attention. And Tim Gunn was amazing at that hearing, if anyone was there. Oh, and this was my last slide to end on something positive, but when I created this PowerPoint, this bill had not actually become law, and just last week this became law. New York is the first state in the nation to ban, throughout the whole state, barbaric cat decline. So that was a huge victory. And another example that it took many years of persistence, of never giving up, through lobbying, educating elected officials, getting media attention, getting animal lovers and supportive vets on board. It happened because of persistence and not giving up. So I just want to leave you with the message of, don't be discouraged if you don't have immediate success with animal rights issues, because it just doesn't work that way. We can change the world for animals if we keep the fight going, never lose hope, and never give up. Animal rights, more than ever in our history, is being considered as an important social justice issue. And each of you plays a part in creating the world we want to see for animals. Another world is possible, and we can make it real. Thank you.
Yay, New York! Thank you for the work you do there, Edita. And our final speaker is Michael Budkie. He is the co-founder of Stop Animal Exploitation Now. He has been in this work since 1986, shutting down a number of research projects and laboratory experimentation on animals. Let's welcome Michael Budkie.
What I'm going to be talking about today is using and interacting with the news media. And one of the first things we have to realize or think about when we're talking about working with news media is, why are we trying to interact with them? Well, there are a couple of reasons. In any case, the reasons that we try to work with the news media and get things into the news media is to at one and the same time educate the public, change public opinion, and also put pressure on those who abuse animals. Because whether we realize it or not, the fondest wish of every animal abusing industry and individuals who are involved in abusing animals is quite simply to remain anonymous. They don't want the general public to know what they're doing. They don't want the general public to even know that they actually exist. And by the way, I'm probably going to be using examples from the area of animal experimentation, because that's the issue that I work on. But these very same principles and techniques can be used regardless of what issue you are working on. Now, So we want to change public opinion. We want to pressure those who are abusing animals to stop. And quite simply, we can do all of this at the same time through news media. To do this effectively, we need to think about news media, what they do, what their situation is, and who they are. News media, the entire business has changed drastically because of social media and because of the internet. Years ago, the newspaper industry, for example, was entirely different than it is now. It was much more profitable. Newspapers were much more widely read. And now there's a tremendous amount of competition. How many of you get your news primarily from the internet as opposed to a printed newspaper? For every one of you that gets your news from the internet, that takes money out of the hands of newspapers. And also, by the way, out of the hands of television stations and radio stations. As a result, they don't have the staff that they used to. They don't have the number of reporters that they used to. This actually plays in our favor, because what we do is we simply make their jobs easy. We do their work for them. When you're writing a press release, they should not be philosophical diatribes that go on for 3 pages. Because if they are, I will guarantee you right now, you will be the only one that reads them. And if that's your goal, that's fine. But personally, I want to get these issues out into the news media. Press releases should never ever be more than 1 page in length. And they should also be very formatted. You can see at the top here, it gives the date, it gives contact information, and it gives a title. And the title is supposed to be eye-catching. It's supposed to talk about something that is controversial enough that it will grab the news media's interest. If you don't get their interest, your story will not get out. Fortunately, we were able to prove that negligence killed 11,000 plus animals at the University of Michigan, and that kind of got a few people's attention. The other thing, and please keep this in mind, and don't take this negatively. The idea that animal rights activists are opposed to things like animal research or carriage horses or the use of animals in furs, that in and of itself is not news. If you're going to be doing an event, say a protest at a laboratory, that becomes a little more newsworthy. If you're doing a protest at the University of Michigan because they just killed 11,000 animals and you can prove they did it and say which animals they killed and how, that becomes a lot more interesting. If you then say do something like walking your protest in the chancellor's office to say you need to stop doing this, that's really, really interesting. The point is, news media is a way to effect change, because not only does it put pressure on our targets, it changes public opinion. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we have, through our work, generated over 100 unique news stories per year on the animal research issue in the United States. During that same time is exactly the period during which public opinion on the animal research issue has changed in our favor. That is not a coincidence. Keeping your issues out in front of the public changes public opinion. That's all there is to it. Now, what kind of results do... Oh, let me finish. As I said, this is not a long document. That's the whole thing. Actually, this one is actually less than 1 page. It's good to give them a quote that they can use from you or your spokesperson. You need to identify who you are. You need to say some kind of thing you've done to try to pressure the system, whether it's contacting the university administration, filing a criminal complaint with your local animal cruelty officer. In our case, we filed complaints with the United States Department of Agriculture, or in some instances, the National Institutes of Health. Think about your issue. Almost every use of animals is regulated by someone, somehow. If they're regulated, you file a complaint with them, even though you know they're never ever going to do anything about it. Because it sounds like an official action you're taking, and it makes the story more interesting. And besides that, they'll surprise you. We thought that with the current administration, the USDA was no longer citing animal laboratories. Within just the last 2 weeks, 3 major facilities have been issued critical citations as a result of official complaints that we had filed. You never know what results you're going to get until you take action. Wrong one. Here we go. This is one of the results from that press release which you saw before. This is an internet news story. This was generated by distributing that press release that I showed you earlier. And the folks at the University of Michigan hate nothing more than to hear that their negligence killed 11,000 animals. This is another, this is a news story in the University of Michigan student newspaper. So now not only is that out there on an internet news source, this is all over the University of Michigan campus. This is in the Ann Arbor News, the local daily newspaper. Reaches hundreds of thousands of people. And, yes, this one. Huffington Post reaches thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Let me tell you something. The day that we sent that press release out, the folks at the University of Michigan had a really, really bad day. And we like to make lots of laboratories have really, really bad days. Yes. The point here, oh, and before I forget, I want to make sure to say this. On our website, which is www.saenonline, we have a section where we have posted our press releases. You can go on there, look at the format, copy it, steal it, that's what it's there for. We want you to do the same kind of thing, because we want all of these abuses to end, and, you know, we're only one organization, we can only take on the research industry. It's up to you to do everybody else. But if we can make it easier for you, just like if you can make it easier for the news media, more things are going to happen. If let's say, you have documents that prove that your local zoo accidentally killed animals, which, by the way, there are USDA inspection reports, they're out there, you can get them. Exposing what's going on at your local zoo, that they negligently killed, say, a monkey, one of the other animals in their possession, that's going to pressure the zoo to change. If you get documents like that, you want to make them easily accessible. If your organization has a website, before you send out your press release, you post those documents on your website, put a link in the press release so that they can be readily reached. We very, very often have news stories materialize, and the people in the news media never even talk to us because they don't need to. We make it that easy for them. We, as much as possible, do their job for them. Remember, you would hear years and years ago about what investigative journalists do. They develop information and they expose what's going on in situations where laws are being broken. Think about this. If you go out and get the information, you obtain the documents that prove what's going on, you do something to pressure an industry or an animal abuser to change, essentially you've just become an investigative journalist. You've done their job for them. They can do 2 or 3 news stories that day because you handed one to them on a silver platter. That's what they want because it makes their life easy. So think about this, attack your issues, because, and I'll give you just one example. We recently filed a lawsuit against the University of Southern California because they violated a number of regulations and everything else. Well, when we announced that, that was picked up by the KABC television station in Los Angeles. We were able to determine that one broadcast of that news story on that television station reached over 100,000 people. We never even left our office when that took place. We didn't hold a news conference in Los Angeles. This is really, I mean, people think animal activism can be extremely difficult, and if you refine your approach, you focus on a specific issue, and you develop meaningful information, it doesn't have to be difficult. And that way, you can essentially become your friendly neighborhood animal abuser's worst nightmare. Thank you.
We'll now take your questions. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone in the front of the room. We have about 10 minutes, so keep your questions concise, to the point, and indicate who your question is for.
Christina Files, a quick question for both of you. Is lab experimentation on animals in labs going down in the U.S.? And my question for you, I've heard about Happy the elephant, who I think's been in isolation for 15 years at the Bronx Zoo, and they're trying to get her out of the zoo. If you could talk about that. Thanks.
Yeah, Happy the elephant, yes, that is actually the Non-Human Rights Project is really taking that issue on, and I wish, is Nora Constance Marino here? Because there's an elephant that's been living in isolation in the Bronx Zoo for a very long time. Non-Human Rights Project is using that horrific incident to try to highlight how wrong it is to keep elephants in particular in captivity, because elephants are the next species that Non-Human Rights Project is trying to gain legal personhood for, but utilizing this horrible situation for Happy the elephant. And there was already one protest held at the Bronx Zoo by Non-Human Rights Project. I believe they're doing another one. If I was able to access who asked that question? Yeah, you come to me after, I will. Do you live in New York? No. Okay, well, there is going to be a second protest being held there in a press conference with Non-Human Rights Project. It's coming up soon, I just don't remember exactly the date.
It's August 10th.
August 10th, okay, great. Yeah, it's happening August 10th. And I know, if you go to Non-Human Rights Project's Facebook page, they will have information on what you can do to help. And again, this is about kind of also getting media attention, but contacting legislators, local elected officials there that can help get that elephant the hell out of that hellhole and into a sanctuary.
In terms of your question about the numbers of animals used in experimentation, unfortunately there's really no accurate way to know, because the vast majority of animals that are used in experimentation are excluded from coverage by the Animal Welfare Act, which is the only law that regulates the use of animals in laboratories. And as a result, since they're excluded from the definition of the word animal, that includes rats, mice, all cold-blooded animals, fish, and birds, and in some cases, what are referred to as animals that are agricultural or used in agricultural research. None of those animals are even counted. We actually have no way of knowing. And grant dollars, while we've certainly seen the number of grant dollars increasing, that doesn't necessarily mean the number of animals are increasing. I would certainly be comfortable saying, though, that I do not feel that the number of animals in laboratories has declined significantly. I would say it is at best stayed the same.
So in respect to what you just said, and what you said about legislation and bringing things to attention, is it possible that groups of people could ask for legislation that counts these animals so that we have a better understanding? But I'm only responding from that, but I also wanted to know, the Bronx Zoo, I believe, has a television show now about zoo life. I think I skimmed by it, where the zookeepers are, I don't know if it's National Geographic or whatever, but in respect to the elephant in isolation, if everybody wrote to the programmers of this show that's been on, I don't know if it's Nat Geo Wild, I don't know. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It's called Zookeepers, and I'm pretty sure they're covering the Bronx Zoo, and they're glorifying, you know, the activity of the companionship and relationship between the zookeepers and their animals. And maybe if everybody wrote to who's sponsoring that show or producing that show and question the hypocrisy of what's happening with that particular animal, if that would help.
Well, in answer to your first question, I believe the New England Anti-Vivisection Society actually either already has legislation introduced or is at least working on legislation to require all of the animals that are in laboratories to be counted. So that is at least on the horizon.
Despite my best efforts, I missed a good part of the workshop, so I'm not sure if you covered this already, but what is your opinion as far as different approaches when you're trying to address the media, as far as, like, you were talking about, you know, exposing people for wrongdoing? Do you think that doing positive, uplifting stories too, to kind of expand people's circle of compassion and decrease their speciesism can help? Like, for example, you talking about rats and mice. Rodent rescue is my niche, so I have a special place in my heart for rodents, and it makes me so mad, it breaks my heart that, like, farm animals, they aren't protected, and that's one of the things I'm striving for, is to find a way to get them protection. But, you know, I think that, you know, if in the media, you know, we were to profile some of these species that there's, you know, this stigma and this phobias about, and say, you know, these are awesome animals, I think that, you know, positive kind of coverage can help too. What do you think?
Yeah,
I think absolutely. I think we all need to chip away from as many different angles as we can. And I think a certain kind of message is going to reach a certain person. Earthlings works for certain people. Other people will not even get near that film. And Bambi works great for others. And I mean, that's two extremes, but in my films, I tend to not do, I mean, they are journalistic, but I tend to want to tell at least some positive stories. And I also think it's really important to give people, so that they don't feel completely helpless, to give people, empower people to feel that they can take some sort of action and that we're making progress, and to give people some sort of hope. So I think there's room for every kind of message, and I think absolutely. And you know, next year's the year of the rat. Do you know that? It's your year, baby.
I think I might have actually been born a year of rat, and my middle name is Star, so backwards it's rats, so it's definitely. My middle name is Star, so backwards it's rats, so it's definitely.
Well, maybe I'll talk to you afterwards, because I'd like to make a film for the year of the rat. So we can chit chat. And you know, they use rats to sniff out landmines in Africa.
Yes.
I mean, that's heroic. So that's a great story that will elevate rats in people's eyes. So I think you're right on that it's important. Anybody else?
We are out of time. If you do have a remaining question, please connect with our speakers afterwards. I'm sure they'd be happy to continue the conversation. Let's give it up for Michael